Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Dan Finley. Dan is a member of the Board of Governors and co-chair of the club's issue committees. He will ask the first question of our speaker. Following Dan's question, we will open the program to questions for members of City Club that are in the audience. If you're too shy to ask, come to the microphone. You can ask your questions by writing it on one of the cards at the tables, and raise your hand, and a member of the staff will come and pick up the card and give it to Dan. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by the corporate underwriting from Providence Health Plans, from U.S. Bank, Washington Mutual Savings Bank. We're very grateful for their support. The array of information on what's happening to America's youth is dazzling. Depending on your point of view, the policies in place are proof that we have enough control or that the situation's in the tank. We do know that classroom size in our Portland schools is getting larger, and that the resources needed for the school district has needed to be supplemented by help from both the city and the county. We know that a substantial number of our young people do not have adequate health programs. While recent emphasis on early childhood programs is refreshing in its effort to have a positive impact on troubling situations, many of the programs are seriously underfunded. We need to move along using old workable ideas, but we can't close the patent office on new ideas as well if it looks like they'll work. As Richard Nixon said at one of his cabinet meetings on a Vietnam issue, we can't stand pat. We need aggressive, informed leadership. In the last 20 years, Jim Francesconi has become that. He came to Portland as a full-time volunteer working in inner Northeast Portland. He served on statewide and local boards involving youth, neighborhoods, employment, public safety, and law. Much of his emphasis has been finding employment for youth. Jim is a graduate of Stanford with honors in history and humanities, and from the University of Oregon Law School. Before joining the Portland City Council, he practiced law in Portland since 1978. Jim is the commissioner in charge of Parks, the Fire Bureau, the Bureau of General Services, and the Bureau of Licenses. Jim?
Members and guests of the City Club, first, thanks to the City Club for serving fettuccine today in my honor. For your sake and for mine, I only wish you'd included red wine. I understand that over the years, one or two of my colleagues on the City Council have given rather lengthy speeches here at the City Club. In fact, after one such speech, the butter on my plate had actually turned to cheese. So be warned. This January will mark my third year as a public servant. To be honest, names like public servant and elected officials are fancy ways of saying politician. So with apologies to David Letterman and his top 10 list, I would like to share with you the top 3 lessons I've learned in my short political life. The third most important: the human brain starts working the moment you're born, and it stops the moment you stand up to speak in public. The second most important lesson: always keep the guys who hate you away from the guys who are undecided. And the number one most important political lesson of all: when you have no one left to blame but yourself, you are definitely understaffed. Jillian liked that one, Commissioner Hale's staff. I love my job because it gives me a unique opportunity every day to learn more about the city and her people. I want to share some of that knowledge with you today because I believe the more we know, the harder it is to grant ourselves exemption from civic life and civic duty. Let me begin by telling you a story of Portland. It is a story without an ending, but one with a role for each of us to play. This is not the story we tell out-of-town delegations or visiting dignitaries. The one that begins in the 70s that tore up a freeway and now wants to cap another one. The story about Pioneer Square, light rail, and regional land use planning. The story that ends with the city that works and we all live happily ever after. My story begins a bit further back in time. A time when Portland and Oregon invented reasons to keep out blacks and Catholics, Latinos, Southeast Asians, and other immigrants. The Ku Klux Klan was powerful enough in the 1920s to pass legislation closing Catholic schools, schools that themselves were white only, until the 1930s. Blacks could not own property, live, or work where they wanted because of segregation. In fact, the National Urban League called post-war Portland, quote, the most prejudiced town in the West. Meanwhile, the mayor did not even believe racism existed. And the Oregonian wrote, quote, racism was comparatively so minor a problem, it would be shameful for us to engage in even a discussion, close quote. The moral of our story is that good, courageous people, black and white, took a stand and said, this is wrong. They did it the Portland way, by taking responsibility, by reaching out and creating positive change. These were people with large hearts and the guts and the imagination to see Portland not as two cities, divided between the fortunate and the forgotten, the powerful and the powerless, but Portland as it should be, one city, whole, undivided. In fact, this very organization, the City Club, in 1957, chastised those public officials who ignored, quote, the presence of segregated housing and general slum conditions, which we have found do exist, close quote. Justice was shamefully slow in coming, and we still have a long way to go, as evidenced by the lack of diversity on the boards and commissions of local governments, business organizations, and corporations in this town. But some positive change did happen. Portland grew stronger and more vital as some barriers to equality were brought down. The entire city benefited from the brains and creativity and hard work that lie in all of our people, in all of our neighborhoods, not just a privileged few. I know I saw similar change happen. The Jesuit Volunteer Corps brought me to Portland 25 years ago to run the recreation program at St. Andrews in Northeast Portland. I taught PE and kept the community center open. For some reason, I was always the last one picked for basketball games. When the gym burned down on Martin Luther King's birthday, the outpouring of help from the community was overwhelming. We established relationships and friendships across the racial divide. Trust that led to the Portland Organizing Project, which organized citizens to shut down drug houses. Trust that led to the banks investing and making loans in Northeast Portland. Trust that led to the Youth Employment Coalition, which was a partnership with the Albina Ministerial Alliance and the Coalition of Black Men. And together, we worked to have businesses hire gang-involved youth. By constantly tapping into a widening pool of talent, I've seen people and neighborhoods inspired, renewed, energized. The struggle to build one city with opportunity for all is the central story of our time. It defines our sense of fair play, our belief that every person has inherent value, our belief that we are all in this together, that as a society we depend upon one another. More than anything else, it defines the character of our city by asking the fundamental question, what kind of people are we? The answer lies in the next chapter of our story, the one that you and I will write together. Portland is not the same city it was 25 years ago or even 10 years ago. What I see is Portland increasingly becoming two cities, existing side by side, cut off and isolated from one another. From here at the Hilton Hotel, or from a suite of offices at the top of Big Pink, you can see one of those cities. One for those who own property, who have good jobs with stock options, and own capital assets. But if you're a child living in an apartment building on Southeast 132nd and Stark, you see a different city. One with no safe place to go after school. One with parking lots for playgrounds, overcrowded classrooms, few counselors, no coaches, no after-school sports to help you stay out of trouble. A city with no plan to keep you in school or send you to college or job training. A city that, in the end, asks for little and gives little in return. There is an awesome gap between these two cities. In one, there's more development now than at any time in our history. New office buildings, hotels, an expanding convention center, the Pearl and the River District, Old Town, Chinatown, from the University to the Rose Quarter, to the East Bank Esplanade, to the North Macadam. Portland is on a roll. We're naturally tempted at a time like this to declare our victories. But as we celebrate this success, we must remember the other Portland. I said we are a different city now than we were, and here are some of the reasons why. The percentage of households with children in Portland is dropping. Poverty rates for children under the age of 5 are up from 15% in 1980 to 23% now during our best economic times. 38% of public school students are on free or assisted lunch. In the other Portland, single mothers with children work 8 hours a day at jobs that don't pay enough to cover daycare, rent, food, and clothing. The poverty rate for children under 6 with single mothers is nearly 60%. And they're the ones most responsible for the 14% increase in emergency food baskets this past year. The face of Portland is also changing. The overall minority population is up 40% in this decade. 16% of children under 5 live in families where English is not the primary language. The Latino dropout rate is over 32%. The average grade point for African American students in this city that works is 2.1. There is a huge disparity in test scores among our schools. If you go to school on the west side, your chance of staying in school and going to college are much greater than if you go to school on the east side. While the inflation-adjusted spending increased 4% for K-12 schools, the prison budget increased by 60%. What kind of city are we if we define ourselves only by the properties we have developed or the jail cells we have built? What kind of people are we if we fail to use our prosperity to give more of our citizens a toehold in this new economy? There's more to a great city than the bottom line and the available square footage of office space. Prosperity is not an end in itself, but an opportunity to build one Portland. In January 1988, a governor of Oregon stood before this city club and called upon us all to be stewards of the child. I answered Neil's call and worked on what was called the Children's Agenda. But when Neil left office, our momentum stalled, our focus blurred, our passions dwindled. A child born in 1988 in Oregon would be almost 12 years old today. How many times in those 12 years do you suppose politicians like me have said, children are the future, and then done nothing to prove it? If you were that child, would you believe them? We have so much going for us. We still have one of the best urban school systems in the country. We have a robust, diverse economy that needs skilled workers. We have a history of cooperation between the public and private sector and strong, proud neighborhoods. I believe that a city as blessed as ours, by location and spirit of its people, ought to be able to proclaim as loudly as we can that in this corner of the nation, there is a city with a place in her heart for every young person. Our challenge is to reaffirm our heritage, continue our story, and bring two cities together as one Portland. We can open the circles of opportunity to the hardworking middle class and the working poor, to blacks, Latinos, Southeast Asians, Russians, and other immigrants. It's in our best interest. It's good for business. It's good for neighborhoods. It's good for sustaining a healthy tax base. And it begins with young people. I propose for the new century that we finally make good on the implicit social contract, that first, our children's lives will be better than ours, and that they will rise as far as their ambitions and dreams will lead them. Second, if we truly believe that Thomas Jefferson's dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is every child's birthright, then we will provide equal opportunity for every child in every neighborhood, regardless of race, class, or socioeconomic status. And third, we will leave this special place to our children better than we found it. Fulfilling this social contract will require the steady, patient, day-by-day pursuit of long-term strategies. City commissioners on their own can fix very little, but we can put people into positions to make a difference. Collective problems require collective solutions. Government lacks the resources and the credibility to do it alone. Besides, government doing alone relieves people of responsibility. I'm not talking about charity or handouts here. These programs and proposals give opportunity while demanding accountability. They're about finding new ways of doing business by forming partnerships with the private sector and churches and synagogues led by people such as Bishop Wells, who's here today. They're about combining common sense and compassion by holding government accountable, by setting benchmarks and goals, by driving costs down while increasing satisfaction, and by giving everyone a stake in the outcome. Government's mission is to create commonwealth, not private wealth. But we can learn much from businesses. Above all, a program's worth must be provable and verifiable based on research, not on someone's opinion or political connections. Another thing I've learned is that talking about a problem is not solving it. Words can inspire, but they are not actions. Here are some actions. First, a strategy for all of us to support K-12 schools. County Chair Bev Stein and I have created Sun Schools, or Schools Unite Neighborhoods, a project that partners with the schools, the county, and the private sector to expand the use of neighborhood schools. When the 8 schools are up and running in Portland, we will reach 5,000 kids that will have something to do after school. That's the time when parents are working, and as you know, most juvenile crime is committed. But children also need extra time in the classroom if they're ever going to even come close to these state standards. But they also need time to be kids. They need time for playing sports. They need time for taking field trips. They need exposure to music and art. I also believe that giving back to the community has been missing not only from the schools, but from our community. So we are creating time and opportunity for kids to do community service projects in their neighborhoods after school. We are also finding ways to support high-risk youth to keep them in school and provide them with jobs. Congregations in 25 Northeast Portland churches are providing mentors to the incoming class at Jefferson, for example. We have Pastor Bethel and Pastor Bailey here who are standing up and providing the leadership we need if we're going to get anywhere in this community. We are also asking employers to adopt a school. For example, Providence Health System has adopted Laurelhurst Elementary School, Fernwood Middle School, and Grant High School so kids could learn from the world of work. At our request, Intel is now adopting Benson. We are asking employers to create endowment funds for the schools, allow employees to be mentors and volunteers, make work opportunities for the teachers as well as the students, and provide jobs with good jobs to youth who are trying academically. Finally, we are creating apprenticeship programs in our own bureaus. Chief Wall is here. The Fire Bureau is working with Grant and Jefferson High School to develop school-to-work opportunities in emergency medicine and fire services. Next, we must work to increase the percentage of poor children who enter school ready to learn. We have leadership from Commissioner Nadeau's here and Commissioner Stan on this issue. We should support efforts to fully fund Head Start for all eligible children. We can expand the preschool programs offered in our parks community centers to serve more poor families and their children. But ultimately, large employers, you need to step up and provide quality daycare for your employees. I believe that public education, as many of you do, is the greatest invention that our country has ever made. And hurting public education does more damage to this country than any Soviet dictator ever thought of. That's the reason I and others spent so much time at the last legislative session advocating for more funding for schools. There is a Yiddish proverb that says, "A half-truth is a whole lie." The legislative leadership tells us a half-truth when they say they increased the school budget over the previous biennium. What they don't say is that the increase doesn't cover inflation, restore eliminated programs, and assist with the increased academic demands placed on schools by that legislature. I've been in enough schools to know that teachers and principals are under siege and need help. It is common sense to reward the good ones, place the bad ones on a course of corrective action. But for God's sake, give them the smaller class sizes and the books and equipment they need to do their demanding and essential job right. And don't forget this, the only mental health care many children receive is from school counselors. The only health care they receive are from school nurses, and these have almost been eliminated. Possessing the power to fix things, but pretending you don't, is a moral abdication by the powerful, and it is wrong. The right thing to do is to support Portland Schools' local option ballot measure, which will ask voters for approximately $10 million for the next 5 years. But we must not forget East Portland. We must also support bond measures that East Portland school districts need to maintain and expand their existing facilities. And we must not forget all school children in Oregon. We must support the governor's initiative to create a school stabilization fund that will benefit all of Oregon's children. Next, there is a growing gap between the technological haves and have-nots. To close it, we need a strategy for moving more young people into the higher education system and on to higher paying jobs. Right now, only 30% of our public school students go on to college. I believe we can boost our economy and help our schools by strengthening our local research capacity at Portland State University and Oregon Health Sciences University. We can work with PSU and the private sector to develop a world-class engineering facility and do the same with OHSU to increase their scientific research capacity. In return for city assistance, they can help teach math and science in our middle schools and help kids make the transition to college. We can also work with local universities like University of Portland to create challenge scholarships for students who meet certain requirements. Our third strategy is to make neighborhoods more friendly to children and families by providing more and better parks and housing. I insisted on getting land from the Portland School District in exchange for funds, and the result is 4 new parks in Southwest Portland. I am just now creating a $5 million fund for the purchase of parkland in park-deficient neighborhoods, especially east of 82nd. We must buy more land before it is gone. For many of our kids, day camp or summer camp is a pipe dream. Summer vacation is a picnic in the park and a place in the shade on a hot day. If our children are going to thrive, they need the recreational activity provided by our Parks Department and others. So we're raising resources from the private sector to purchase land, rehabilitate tennis courts, and fix play structures. We're funding more after-school programs with nonprofits such as Boys and Girls Club, Campfire, Saturday Academy. Someday we will again ask the voters to allow us to rehabilitate our community centers and build more swimming pools and soccer fields. Nothing we propose will mean anything to a child without decent shelter. We must provide more subsidized rental units for families. We can also increase home ownership opportunities through employer-assisted housing programs, where employees are given significant down payment assistance if they stay on the job. And we got to be careful about building all of these apartment buildings on busy streets, unless there's also play areas for children and parks nearby. Finally, I want to mention an issue that doesn't fall under the heading of program, but is essential in our efforts to build one Portland. Is it expecting too much of our legislators to pass laws that make it more difficult for children to kill themselves and one another? I strongly urge you all to sign Ginny Burdick's petition to register guns at gun shows and to require background checks. This is clearly not the total answer, but it is a positive step that we can take now. We have to keep guns out of the hands of our children. The wild card in all this talk about one Portland is you. Because the one thing all these ideas and initiatives have in common is the need for citizen involvement. Whether it's mentoring a child, adopting a school, signing a petition, voting, or attending a meeting. I know what you must be thinking. Most of us already feel as if we attend meetings for a living. With cell phones and emails, we're never far from work. There's barely enough time in the week for our own families, much less someone else's. I know. I and my wife and I face this dilemma every day. And yet I know this too. A participatory democracy lives or dies by the extra few hours its citizens are able to carve out of their private lives for their public duties. We ignore these duties at the risk of our own well-being. A better future for Portland depends upon our willingness to believe, even if we cannot solve every problem, we can do a far better job of empowering young people to succeed. And their success will make life better for all of us, because our personal well-being and that of our families and friends depends upon the well-being of the whole community. The health of your child depends upon the health of my child, and vice versa. A better future for Portland depends upon our willingness. Someone once said that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. If we let apathy rule our public life, then one day we're going to find out exactly how many prisons we can afford. Because what's done to children, they'll do to society. It's time for us to remember where we came from. Both my grandfathers came to Ellis Island as teenagers. They had nothing, and yet they had everything. They had no money or possessions to speak of, but they had something more important that is in short supply today. They had family, they had community, church, and fraternal organizations to help them find their way. We lived next door to my grandparents when I was growing up. Nuns and priests were my role models. My grandfather steered me towards becoming a lawyer because I liked to argue. His bootleg money was my scholarship to Stanford. Many of us are in this room today because when we were children, someone or some institution gave us a break. Whether it was a teacher, family member, a mentor, the GI Bill, a scholarship, a first job. We must not forget what gave us the chance to learn, to go to college, to work, to raise a family, to own a house, to be secure in our old age, to live with dignity. The point I want to make is that we all had help, but so many kids today have no one to help them. As a nation, we let the vulnerable fall behind while the rest of us moved on to the 10,000-point Dow Jones. As my friend Tony Hobson says, we don't have a youth problem in this country, we have an adult problem. But we, you and I, can extend our arms to our children, and together we can lift up generations of young people. I asked earlier the question, what kind of people are we? Let me answer that question with another Portland story. In 1990, 5-year-old Charlie Johnson was playing on the floor of his home in Northeast Portland. A stray bullet from a gang-related shooting crashed through a window, shattering his skull. His mother cradled him in her arms in the ambulance on the way to the hospital where he died. A community meeting was held at a church to try to get at the underlying causes of such insanity. Charlie's mother showed up because she wanted to be part of the solution. That meeting led to the birth of the Youth Employment Coalition. 300 employers took 800 gang-involved youth into their workplace. That's a lot harder to do, folks, than give money. She volunteered to serve as a spokesperson to employers to convince them to hire these youth. She wanted her son's short life to stand for something, so she reached out and created something good in his name. Charlie would have been 14 years old today. Imagine what kind of young man he would have grown up to be with such a mother to guide him, to pass on her values. Imagine that, and you may begin to understand what we have lost over the years. All those other unfulfilled lives, never giving the chance to grow and contribute to the life of this city. What are we going to be remembered for? I don't think I could have been as kind and wise and forgiving as Charlie's mother. But at least we can draw a line in the sand and say, no more wasted lives. I joked earlier about being a politician. But if being a politician means making the case for youth and finding ways for getting people plugged into these issues, then I'm proud to be a politician. Maybe that's because one of my heroes was a politician, Robert Kennedy. Please listen to something he once said. It is vital for us, as much as for them, that our young feel that change is possible, that they will be heard, that the cruelties and follies and injustices of the world will yield grudgingly to the sweat, sacrifice they are so ready to give. If we cannot open to them this sense of possibility, we have only ourselves to blame for the disillusionment and the danger that will surely come. We rely on these young people more than we know. We rely on our youth for our hopes for a better future, and thus, in a real and direct sense, for the very meaning of our own lives. John Lewis, the great congressman and civil rights worker from Georgia, believes that something died in this country when Robert Kennedy died. I think he means that our leaders never ask us to sacrifice for community or country, never ask us to do anything that's not in our direct economic self-interest, and that somehow a society we can be proud of will build itself. I respectfully disagree with Congressman Lewis. I believe that the embers are still glowing. It's time to light this sacred fire of civic virtue, of devotion to place, of working together in a great and common endeavor. I am upbeat about our city's future. There's much to celebrate about Portland. The future is filled with possibility. But there is no denying, no escaping the underlying moral question, which is also a political one. Are we, or are we not, still in this together? We need you, the realists and the dreamers, the pragmatists and the visionaries. For the good of us all, please, help make Portland one city, under God, with equal opportunity for all, and her place in her heart for every child. Thank you.
Commissioner Francesconi, touching remarks. Thank you very much. The room is filled with visionaries, with dreamers, with idealists, and I'm not really as concerned about the people in this room and people like them as I am about people outside of this room. I'd like us to be able to take everyone else along for a ride that will take us to a wonderful tomorrow, and I would like your impressions and your ideas on what we need to do to reinstill faith in the educational process in this country so that we can bring everyone to the table on an equal footing.
Don't worry about my name. It took my wife about 6 months after we were married to be able to pronounce it right, so don't worry about that part. Before I answer the educational part of it, I guess I'd like to disagree with the initial part of what you said. Civic Club is a terrific organization. It has historically stood out on issues of racism, lack of equal opportunity. But even the City Club can do more, and you can see it as reflected in the diversity in this room today. So I think I would start with the City Club, how it can relate to schools. Maybe the City Club should adopt a school, Roosevelt or Jefferson. The City Club should reach out to the African American Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and form relationships and do some things in that regard. I guess what remarks were aimed at is that we all can do more, even those that are doing a lot. On the issue of education, I was proud to be part of the strategic planning group for Portland Public Schools. We spent 3 days, and of that 3 days, we only talked about funding for about 10 minutes. In the discussion, we talked about equal opportunity for all schools and how we target additional resources. The whole theory behind the Sun Schools is how can we target additional resources at those schools that are not succeeding. We also agreed that children need to reach high standards, but there need to be a way to reward the good teachers and have a corrective plan of action for the others. So we cannot talk about education without all funding, without talking about some accountability and issues of that. We also talked about having individualized plans where individual children can have goals. A teacher, a principal of mine, lives close to my house. She tells me how frustrating it is for English as a second language student to be making so much progress, but still not at state standards and no reward for those kinds of efforts. On the issue of funding, I believe the local option is the first thing we need to do. I believe the governor's initiative is the second. I would like us, my hope is that a child in Baker can still get a good education as a child in Portland. But at some point, if the legislature doesn't act, we have to regionally address this issue. So the last thing I want to say is it takes businesses and citizen volunteers to partner with a school, create that individual relationship with the child, and volunteer in your school, and businesses need to adopt these schools. It's a long answer to your question.
Jim, first of all, I'd like to compliment you on your remarks. Truly some of the best I think that this audience has had an opportunity to hear. Next, also, I'd like to ask you if you could share with us your opinion of the Urban League and the challenges that are now before it. And then also, what, if anything, should the city, county, and the business community be doing to help, just as they did in helping our public schools, as well as OMSI, et cetera?
George, first on a personal note, that compliment you just paid me coming from you is one of the most significant compliments I've ever had in my professional life. George has been a strong supporter of the Urban League for a lot of years. The things I was talking about in this remarks about equal opportunity can't be done in Northeast Portland without a healthy Urban League. And you can't do these things just from government. You need people and institutions in the community advocating for themselves that you can partner with government. The key to the Urban League, in my view, is education and employment. I was on the Urban League board for 8 years. I haven't been there for the last 4 or 5 years. I believe several steps. We need to get results of an audit. The board needs to be strengthened. A new staff executive director has to come in who understands the principles of business and how to hold programs accountable. We need all of that. Folks in the business community have already called about being willing to get back on that board and raise money from the private sector, which needs to happen. The business community has been very generous in a lot of programs, and we cannot succeed without the Urban League. On the issue of the city and county, I think on an interim basis, financial management assistance should come from the city. I've already talked to the city OFA people about that. I think the county can do more in terms of the kind of technical support. We sometimes set up institutions to fail by not providing the adequate technical assistance and training. On the other side of the equation, some folks in the community have not stood up soon enough when there's some issues like this that are out there. So it's going to take both of us to deal with this, but we cannot do these things without restoring the stature of the Urban League to where it belongs.
We're going to alternate the questions from floor to cards. And if any of you have questions that you've not yet written down or you're not comfortable standing at the microphone, please take a card, dash down the question, hold it up, and we'll get that up here. Question from a member of the audience. What's going to happen on the Moyer block, the forecourt for the Paramount Hotel, the Fox Tower, and what could happen at the Moyer-owned Guild Theater? Is there a compulsion to build something and not leave it green?
one of the other privileges in my professional life is to be the Parks Commissioner. And what's so special about that is you can have places where people can gather, including in the heart of our city. In terms of the the Green Park, it's actually being analyzed as we speak to see what is the best solution. It does be, in my opinion, how we continue the theme of the park blocks by also maintaining retail in a way that keeps the downtown core is essential. The leadership of Neil Goldschmidt and the generosity of Tom Moyer has been tremendous because it gives us an opportunity to connect these blocks in some fashion. Having said that, I also believe we need a more public, open process about how this thing should look, because this is the heart of all of our city.
Gretchen Kafori, City Club member, thank you for your passion and commitment.
I miss you, Commissioner Kafori.
Thank you. For my new perch at Portland State, I am continuing and even enhanced my concern about getting people involved. You've addressed that in your talk, but I wondered if you could be a little more specific about plans you might have about how we do this outreach. How do we get a broader section of perhaps even students or faculty or the general public involved?
Thank you, Commissioner Kafori. I appreciate the question. Let me tell you a quick story. We formed the kickoff of the Youth Employment Coalition that led to hiring those gang-involved youth. We had a community meeting at a church. We asked employers there, business people there, we asked citizens there, we asked volunteers, school people, and we asked them to make commitments to hire youth. That led to that program. We're having another such meeting on November 6th at Whitaker School at 9 o'clock in the morning. We need you to come there, not only to observe, but to see all the good groups that are out there doing things. We're going to highlight the work of good groups, and we're going to ask you to volunteer and hook up with them. But we need you to come. And I know it's difficult because it's another meeting, but we need you to show up on November 6th at 9 o'clock. It's sponsored by the county, the city, the school district, Sisters of Providence Hospital, Bank of America, Fred Meyer. Now we need you to come, and I appreciate the question. Commissioner Nato. Whoops, they don't let me do this.
Tag team time again. Again from the floor, would you please explain your statement in your brochure that you, quote unquote, had taken a leading role in saving the park blocks from a parking garage?
Jonathan Nicholas, are you in the audience here? You know, this is a struggle for me. It's the issue of behind the scenes team player versus public acknowledgement in order to be a politician. It's one of the hardest parts of my job. So here's what happened. I helped negotiate the deal between Doug Goodman and Tom Moyer, and I'd like you to ask them if that's in fact true. I could not consummate the deal. The person that consummated it was Neil Goldschmidt. So Neil Goldschmidt deserves the credit. But ask Tom Moyer and Doug Goodman who set it up.
Commissioner Lisa Nato, City Club member. I think a lot of advocates for children were very discouraged to have the state of Oregon receive a C- again for our efforts for children. But on a more positive note, I know that the city is doing, and the county together with the community are doing some wonderful things. I applaud you for your leadership on Sun Schools and for school-age youth, bringing services to the kids. We're working together on homeless youth, and I think one of the biggest concerns for me is in what we know about brain development in young children, the lack of what really we are doing in our community for early childhood. Issues such as health care for children, quality child care, and even the basics of protecting children from abuse and neglect. I do want to say I'm following in the footsteps, I think, of Pauline Anderson, who's long been an advocate for early childhood, and I know she's in the audience today. So I want to ask you more specifically, what do you see as the city's role in stepping up for young children? First,
Advocating at the federal level. Every time that a politician says that they want to protect Social Security with tax savings, they should be talking about fully funding Head Start and passing money on to early childhood. So all of us have to insist upon that. because the lobby for the elderly far exceeds the lobby for young people. And we are never going to get enough money into the WIC program that the county administers and others, the family prevention centers, without some federal assistance. Second of all, we have a lot of good advocates here in the legislature, like Avell Gordley, that was fighting for schools, but also fighting for health care for our children. And we need to support those efforts at the legislatures with the same degree of vigor that we fight for school funding, because of the reasons you just listed here. And then thirdly, I think we need a more active partnership. And I think this is one that could be led by Commissioner Sten and you, to how we focus our early childhood efforts in a way that Commissioner Stein and I have done on the after-school piece.
How is the City Council planning to influence education issues when they are not directly responsible or in charge of them?
Well, we've done a pretty good job in that regard, because it was the City Council at my request that required the outside performance audit that was done before we gave them any money. So as a result of that performance audit, problems with how they were handling the bonds, problems and potential savings in the facilities, problems in their management structure, especially their financial management structure, were all identified. They have a ways to go still on the facility side. But the other good thing of that performance audit is it showed how lean the top administration is, contrary to some reports. One of my problems in dealing with a school district is they don't have the capacity to deal on some important issues the way that we do at the city. So if anything, if we could do much more at the city to give them some help at the top management levels and support their efforts. Dr. Canada has done a terrific job in assembling talent. Folks, a lot of this is not about programs, it's about talent. Ben Canada is talented. Jim Scherzinger is talented. Bruce Sampson here in the audience is talented. And we have to support those efforts. Not to mention those other superintendents that have brought together, that know what they're doing. So I do think demanding that. The other question I would say is, when we gave money last time, we asked the school district to explain what they're going to do on these minority test scores. And what are they going to do with the low achieving scores, and we want this money targeted at those schools and those kids.
Ann Bisgeyer, City Club member. Following up on your comments about our communities and youth, recently in the Grant Park neighborhood, a supermarket has moved in, open 24 hours, and they have requested to sell alcoholic beverages until 2:30, which is what the state law allows. Many neighbors disagreed with this policy and asked for an 11 p.m. cutoff. It's my understanding that going through the process in City Council, there was a compromise with a 1 a.m. cutoff, but I'd like you to explain your vote and why.
What she didn't tell you is I was the one that didn't vote for the compromise. And it was one of the hardest decisions I made, because two things. One is I care about neighborhoods. Two is I live right near Grant Park, and I use that tennis courts, etc. I'm in charge of the Bureau of Licensing. I also believe that in standards and trying to approach every situation the same way. So I negotiated with QFC an 18-point plan that included more security, more lighting, a monitoring process to look at this. And I personally am going to review this. QFC every 3 months in the neighborhood with QFC. So it's the issue that I have of consistency across the city. I did say at that council hearing that I would consider an ordinance closing all liquor outlets at 1 o'clock. But I thought it was unfair to QFC, despite my love for the Grant Park neighborhood, to single them out when they had such a great track record, both in Seattle, and they hired the store manager where there had been no violations in the past 18 years. James?
Yeah, I'm James Posey, a City Club member. That was a good speech, Jim. But as you well know, I'm more interested in not what you say, but what you do. My question to you is, the challenge that you gave to this audience, the City Club, do you manifest those same sort of values and visions in the bureaus in the city in terms of your hiring practices, the diversity? Are you showing the type of leadership that expresses these values to the rest of the City Council? Tell us, are you comfortable with the manifestation of your leadership on the City Council relative to those issues?
Right. I'm comfortable in part and not comfortable in another part. First of all, that question is maybe better answered by some of the other folks, especially people of color in the audience and in the city. I have the most diverse staff at the policy level, and I did that because it gives me access to information and talent that you do not get anywhere else in the city. Since Johnny's been on my staff, I've seen African American males for the first time in City Hall. Since Christina Germain is in my staff, I've been in places in East Portland with the Hispanic community that no commissioner has ever been. Chief Wall has done a terrific job at the Fire Bureau in diversifying the workforce, and I do not deserve credit for that, other than continuing the policies of Commissioner Hales. The Bureau of Licensing has just instituted an aggressive plan. Charles Jordan, there is no one in this audience more committed to this issue than Charles Jordan in Parks. We have a problem in our system, in our civil service system. And we need an apprenticeship program in all the bureaus, not just in Fire Bureau, in order to get a diversified workforce. And that is what I have already proposed to the City Council. We also need much more aggressive reporting on our affirmative action goals. The truth of the matter is, Multnomah County does a better job than the City of Portland in terms of affirmative action. We have already introduced a resolution 4 months ago tidying that up. So in that area, I feel comfortable. In some of the areas that I'm not comfortable is I also believe that in addition to talking about the construction industry, we've got to be using our purchasing power as a city to support minority businesses. And we don't do that very well, but Madeline Wessel, who's here in the audience, is working on that. And I'm not comfortable at all about what we do to support minority businesses in this town. That needs to involve access to capital, it needs to involve better training programs, and it needs to involve contracts. If we do not do this with the light rail line along Interstate, we will never do it. So that's the part I'm not yet comfortable with.
Jim Dan Goldie, City Club member. As you're well aware, federal funding for schools, youth programs are very important. Right now, there's this enormous battle going on in Washington over the budget. What's being threatened is what they're arguing about are vouchers that would transfer public funds to private schools. They're arguing about whether there ought to be standards in local schools. They're arguing about abolishing the Youth Corps, AmeriCorps. What's your position, and do you think that the City Council should be weighing in to try to prevent the undermining of the federal aspects of the youth and education program?
Well, we should be weighing in, but the problem is they're not going to listen to us. So yes, we should weigh in, and we should raise the issue that I tried to raise here. We need a lobby group for youth. We also need a healthy discussion in this city, in this country, about race and the effects upon our young people. So in that way, we can do those things. But the truth is they're not going to listen to us. On the issue of some of what you raised, giving public dollars to private schools I don't support. But giving more flexibility to some schools in order to create more choice for all citizens is something we need to look seriously at.
Jim, thanks very much for a fine program. Again, with that, we're adjourned.